All right, one of the things I've heard a number of people say is that you cannot build muscle without carbohydrates, or carbohydrates are the optimal way to build muscle. And I think there's some caveats to that. Now, I've been on this carnivore diet now. This is my 8th year, and when I started, I was around 245. I'm now about 265. I am now much stronger than I was at 7, 8 years ago when I was 49, 50. Today at 57. I've done this without taking, steroids and testosterone, as many people have sort of accused me of that, but I definitely have not done that. But I've been able to certainly add some muscle and some strength while being on a carnivore diet. I've added some body fat as well. I mean, that's undeniable. I would say probably in those 8 years, I've managed to put on about 10 pounds of muscle, which may not seem like that much. It's a little more than a pound a year, but at my age, it's actually reasonably well. I've been lifting weights for 45 years now, so it's not like these aren't newbie gains that you might obtain in the early years. And so the literature is quite clear when it comes to muscle protein synthesis. That's how you synthesize and build muscle, that carbohydrates do not provide any additional muscle protein synthesis as stimulated by insulin. And because people talk about you need carbs to stimulate insulin, well, it's well known that protein alone gives you as much stimulus for insulin that you need, and adding carbohydrates does not add to that in any way, shape, or form. Now, there may be some benefits on the other side of the equation. Remember, net protein or net muscle building is relying upon muscle protein synthesis, less muscle protein breakdown, and that what you have left is the net. And some people will argue that carbohydrates can limit muscle protein breakdown. And why are we breaking down muscles? Well, in some sense, it's a protein reservoir. Some of that may go into the energy supply, right? And so it goes into the energy supply. And the other thought is that carbohydrates will help you fuel your workouts better so that you can train harder and get a better result. And again, there's some truth to that. However, again, I think it is situational. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that carbohydrates can fuel glycogen and also help with blood glucose increasing blood glucose to a degree. What we see is that those athletes that are adapted to that fueling strategy do better with that fueling strategy. That is to say, if you're used to training, predominantly utilizing glucose, then you're going to do better with carbohydrates. There's no doubt about that. But what happens to someone who is chronically adapted to a lower carb diet, a ketogenic diet for not just a few weeks, but months and months and perhaps years and years? Well, then the energy, is dependent upon, other energy sources, particularly fat. You can train very intensely, as guys like Phil Prims and others have demonstrated, very intensely with a primarily fat-fueled diet. You're still going to have some glucose. Your glucose never goes to zero. Your hepatic glycogen reserves will still be reasonably topped off. You can still produce for those high levels. Certainly for the effort that's required for muscle building. Now, if we're talking about marathons and multiple WODs on CrossFit or something like that, that's a different story. But just to build muscle, the main ingredients are going to be, number one, training. Training is the absolute most important aspect of it. You've got to put in the consistent work in the training. The other thing beyond that is you've got to have adequate protein, and then beyond that is adequate energy supply, And so if you're breaking down muscle, we talk about muscle protein synthesis versus muscle protein breakdown. If you're breaking down some of that muscle and some of that goes into the energy supply to produce, say, glucose. We have gluconeogenic amino acids. We also have some ketogenic amino acids. But if you're breaking it down and carbohydrates inhibit that a little because you have plenty of energy, well, what happens if you're used to using ketones for energy? Then you supply plenty of ketones and free fatty acids, then you're going to have less breakdown as well. At least that's theoretical, I would suppose. But practically, I've been able to put on muscle. I know a lot of people have been able to put on muscle. Now, again, we see a lot of people pointing to guys who are taking steroids. That's a completely different conversation here. I don't take steroids. I'm carrying around 270 pounds of mass right now, 265, 270, depending on when I last eat. That is a lot of muscle mass for particularly someone who's not on drugs. So those people that are out there pointing to, bodybuilder X, Y, or Z, almost all of them are on drugs. And so that's a completely different story. you know, I speculate if I got on drugs, I'd be a lot bigger than I am now. I have no desire to do that. 270 is plenty, it's plenty big, believe me. And I will probably, once I achieve the rowing goals I'm trying to achieve, I will probably, you know, probably lean back down into the 250s, I would imagine. Hopefully retaining, you know, at least a decent amount of the muscle that I've managed to gain over the last several years. All right, guys. So yes, you can gain muscle on a carnivore diet. You got to eat though. I mean, you got to push yourself at the table. You got to push yourself in the gym. You might have to eat more than you want to eat, and that is, again, one of the benefits of carbohydrates is it's easier to consume more calories with carbohydrates. There's no doubt about it. That's why a lot of athletes choose it, because they can just eat more. They can get into a caloric surplus a little easier. Like I'd mentioned, if you are adapted to training with glucose and carbohydrates, then yes, it's going to benefit you in that way. But again, if you're chronically adapted to utilizing more of a fat-based diet, you know, as long as you provide your body that energy, you're going to have less muscle protein breakdown. However, that adaptation period can take 3 months, 6 months, a year perhaps for some people. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Have you been able to successfully put on any muscle whilst on a carnivore diet? Like to see what you guys think about that. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.